You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889. Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name is Johnny Chandler. I'm the owner of KCCC 930 AM and the host of Community Forum. We're going to go ahead and we're going to speak with Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing's been on before. Paul Gessing is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, which is based in Albuquerque. And he's been on before, but if this is your first time listening, Paul Gessing's going to tell us who he is, what his organization is about, and then we've got some great topics for you. So, Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and hope your summer is going well. The Rio Grande Foundation is a public policy research, what you would call a think tank. We're a nonpartisan research and advocacy organization. We look at issues facing New Mexico in especially its economy and education areas, and we recommend research-based improvements in those areas. So we're trying to really affect some of the fundamental things happening in New Mexico from a public policy perspective.
So you guys just don't have pie in the sky ideas, right? You have ideas based on data, statistics, things of that nature, research that shows that maybe has a proven track record towards solving some problems, right?
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about federalism, and I forget who it is. One of the Supreme Court justices called it the laboratory of the states. One of the geniuses of the founding fathers was the creation of these different states, which have a lot of independence in the area of public policy, especially economic policy, to try their own approaches. Unfortunately, for most of its history, New Mexico has been relatively poor, and that's driven largely by poor economic policy choices that have been made over the years. And we've got our work cut out for us here at the Rio Grande Foundation. The state has a lot of oil and gas money, a lot of federal dollars flow into New Mexico relative to other states, but we do remain one of the most impoverished states in the country with an education system that continues to struggle. So we definitely have a lot of work to do to get those two areas of the state moving in a more positive direction.
Right, so we've got 50 individual states essentially working together, and then some have great ideas and some don't. And so I guess that you can say that our contribution to the nation is how not to run a state.
Yeah, with a few exceptions, and it is vanishingly few. In fact, quickly we at the Rio Grande Foundation are able to often look at our neighboring states. Our neighbors tend to be some of the most successful states. Obviously, geography has a little bit to do with that, but I'll put New Mexico's weather and physical assets up against any of our neighboring states. But Americans are flocking to states like Arizona, Texas, and Colorado because of not just their physical beauty and their relatively benign weather, although Texas may be the exception to that, but they like to come to places that have more freedom, more individual liberty, and the ability to make your own path in this world. And New Mexico, you can certainly do that coming to New Mexico or being in New Mexico, but we do have a lot more economic regulations, higher taxes, and a variety of other policies that make New Mexico more hostile to economic development. We don't have a lot of big corporations, no Fortune 500s headquartered here. We pretty much rely economically on the oil and gas industry and the federal government.
Yeah, from the beginning. So that's a good segue, actually, because I wanted to, a lot of the talk lately, as we know during the legislative session, rebates were issued by our government for just a thank you for all the oil and gas industry money that's going to the state, essentially. So those one-time rebates are starting to roll out. I know that you published something on your blog website, airsenchantment.com. So I wondered what your opinion is on the one-time rebates.
Well, first and foremost, it's worth giving a quick background because during the campaign for governor, Mark Ronchetti, the Republican, outlined a plan for rebates, and the governor's campaign called it a irresponsible socialist scheme. Now, just to be absolutely clear, at the Rio Grande Foundation, we're not specifically advocates for rebates. Rebates are one-time payments. Folks who are single filers in New Mexico will be getting $500 checks. If you are a married couple, you'll get $1,000 check from the state here in a week or so. And the issue is that we believe New Mexico faces a lot of systematic long-term challenges, including our gross receipts tax and overall heavy tax burdens here in New Mexico. The gross receipts tax is the preeminent unfortunate tax burden that we face, but personal income, corporate income, those get in the way of people wanting to be engaged in earning money because you're taking money from productive citizens when you're taxing their incomes. So we have outlined and discussed ways to address both of those issues. And we believe that this is a long-term production-driven oil and gas boom. So it's not just a price-driven temporary blip on the radar screen like we've seen in past booms. But unfortunately, the governor and the legislature, they don't see it that way. And really no tax reform happened at a kind of broad economic scale. We got these rebates, which will reduce revenue to the Treasury of the state of New Mexico by $667 million on a one-time basis. But we had a $3.6 billion budget surplus coming into this legislative session. So, we're talking a tiny percentage of those dollars that we had available being sent out and returned to the people of New Mexico.
Isn't this normal, Paul? Isn't this a normal thing right? Growing up, I was only ever aware of Alaska, right? If you lived in Alaska, it was kind of known or rumored that you would get $1,000 a year just because of the oil and gas industry when living in Alaska, right? So the idea that maybe the state can spend the money more wisely, considering the way our taxes are set up, the bracket, the GRT tax pyramiding, considering that all of that could be improved, isn't rebates on record oil and gas revenue kind of standard procedure throughout the history of our country when it comes to states?
Well, a lot of the oil and gas states that exist in this country have a lot lower taxes. So Texas is the biggest producing state in the United States, and of course they have no personal income tax. Wyoming is another one. They have no personal income tax. Alaska has no personal income tax and no sales tax. So a lot of the states don't go through that kind of boom cycle that we've experienced in New Mexico. They tend to have lower overall tax burdens to start. And then you get Alaska, as you mentioned. They're a unique state. It's obviously cold in Alaska. There's a desire because of that state's sparse population and huge geography to try to keep people there. And so they give them an incentive through their permanent fund. New Mexico, on the other hand, this is kind of a ad hoc situation. There's nothing in the constitution of the state, no permanent fund that hands this money back to the people. Alaska, they have it set up in their constitution and they have a process for returning those dollars. So it's happened other times when New Mexico's had a strong budget and big surplus that the legislature and governor have returned some of those dollars to New Mexico. But our view is that there's no reason New Mexico shouldn't be competing economically with our neighbors, whether it's Texas or Colorado or Utah or Oklahoma or Arizona. We should be really making our state more competitive, and that could involve and should involve serious tax reform. So, as I mentioned, $3.6 billion budget surplus year over year, 667 million of that being rebated, but the rest of that, we're talking almost $3 billion going back to the Treasury or being spent. 1.2 billion of that new budget surplus was spent by the legislature this year, additionally, above and beyond previous spending. So what they do in Santa Fe is they spend money.
Right. So if we fix So essentially, maybe I'll try to sum that up and let me know if I'm correct on this or not, right? You've got Texas, Wyoming, Alaska, very large oil and gas producing states in some form or another that do not have income tax, do not have sales tax, and are still able to give a rebate. So the suggestion for New Mexico is clean up our tax system, clean up our tax code, and then you can give us rebates once we seem to be more competitive with the regional states?
That's fair. Yeah, I'm agnostic on the rebate. Like I said, certainly it's better than new spending, but the thing is that New Mexico has a very long way to go, and I think if we started down the path of doing some of the basic things, like reforming our GRT, like possibly eliminating income taxes on individuals and corporations, and we saw the economic fruits of that, which I believe would very much come to New Mexico, then we can do the rebate thing. Yeah. But rebates, they don't fundamentally shift anything economically. They're nice to receive, but you can't count on them. They have some negative impacts on workforce participation and people on the margins of the workforce who decide that, I've got a $500 check or $1,000 check in my pocket. I don't really want to go to work anymore. And we struggle with workforce participation in New Mexico. So there's a lot of reforms that need to be done to New Mexico's economy before we just start handing out these checks, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think that just from personal part here, Paul, think about the idea of getting $1,000 check and thinking that you have enough money that you don't have to work anymore. Like, I mean, I don't even understand that mindset, because $1,000 doesn't even rent you a place, right? Right. It doesn't go very far anymore. So that's just a crazy mindset that you have $1,000. So if you get $1,000, have a job, go buy something nice for a couple $100, splurge. But holy cow, the idea that you don't have to work because you have $1,000 is insane. That's just my opinion. I don't understand that at all. But I want to go ahead and switch now to the LFC projections, right? So we didn't fix tax pyramiding during the last 60-day legislative session. We didn't really do anything that much for taxes last legislative session, except we're all going to get a little bit of money back if we file correctly. So I wanted to ask you, we have another opportunity financially, it appears, from the recent LFC projections, that we may have an opportunity to try to do this in the 30-day session coming up in 2024. So start by answering, what do you think the chances are that GRT tax pyramiding will be handled and taken care of and improved in the 30-day session? And then tell us what you kind of think about the LFC projections and the latest ones.
So there's a lot. The LFC has made a lot of projections. They have a post-session fiscal review that we looked at a lot and wrote 3 separate posts at errorsofenchantment.com on that report alone. The LFC does a lot of great work. Another recent report, also from the LFC, said that revenues for the fiscal year that's coming to an end here at the end of June, that they had even more money than they thought they were going to have. So another $581 million. So, the oil and gas boom continues, and the legislature and the governor said, I'm going to veto a lot of these tax provisions, because she has this mentality, as I think a lot of the progressives and environmental advocates in New Mexico and across the country see oil and gas going away, in 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, when in reality, our society is going to be relying on oil and gas for the foreseeable future. And New Mexico remains in this production-driven boom. So the question is, with another bite at the apple in terms of the ability to operate from a position of financial strength, as we are likely going to face in the 30-day session in January, will the governor decide to make tax reform a priority? She endorsed the ideas, and I applaud her for doing that. But when it came to what actually was put into that tax bill, she didn't seem to really put the screws to the legislature to get that done. The bill that they pushed through the House and Senate and ultimately to the governor's desk was a hot mess of conflicting economic policy, tax increases, a lot of environmental subsidies for things like electric vehicles. It was just, there was no internal philosophy to that. And, the governor, I was suspicious of the thought that she was going to veto it. A lot of people were saying she would sign it. Some people didn't think she even had the power to line item veto it. I said, this woman is not going to be held back by constitutional niceties. If she thinks she can
or
get away
rules.
if she can get away with putting her stamp on it, she's going to veto what she wants. Now, how that turned out was much different from what I expected. She vetoed a lot of environmental priorities like those EV subsidies and geothermal subsidies, but she did create a situation where, again, even more money was poured back into the coffers for future either spending or future tax reduction. Now, the politics are where this gets interesting because the governor really upset a lot of her left-wing environmental base. A lot of Democrats in the legislature and who are activists in the party are very upset with some of those vetoes. They're also upset with some other vetoes of alcohol tax increases that aren't directly related to oil and gas, but the governor also vetoed some of those provisions in the session. The Republicans, though, they need to get their stuff together and see if they can move the governor and possibly create a kind of coalition of the moderates to get tax reform done. And the sales pitch I would make if I were the Republicans to the governor would be, you want to be seen as a governor that helped turn around New Mexico's economy, that got us out of the same old rut. We have a plan. We've worked on this plan. We can get some moderate Democrats. We could probably even swing some progressives because reform of the gross receipts tax is reform and reduction of a regressive tax, which means it impacts the poor most. And if we do this correctly, this could be a huge political win, not just now, but for the future for this governor. Now, that requires a lot of delicate negotiation and foresight among groups of people, and I include Republicans in this that haven't necessarily been able to do that in the past. But I can promise you we're having conversations with people to try to see if this can possibly happen in the 30-day session. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't take the bet. This would be one of those things where you got the bad news bears versus the upstarts, and it's who knows what could happen with those kinds of groups coming together. But it could happen. There's no reason it shouldn't happen, and it would be a huge win for New Mexico if it did happen.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. I think one of the biggest pains is the gross receipts tax, and as small business owners, my wife and I, it's the idea that we did very well in our business last year, and there's a certain amount of taxes, significant amount of taxes based on GRC that we're going to have to pay no matter how much we invested into our business, Like, let's say that every dollar that we made, we turned around and invested into our business wholeheartedly to grow and become stronger, prettier, whatever you wanted to do for your business goals. But then there's this large percentage that no matter how much I invest to employ more people or to make the community better or to add a service to the community, there's a large tax bill I have to pay no matter what I end up doing. So it's just a very frustrating experience. And then when it pyramids on top of itself, it gets even worse. And so, yeah, I'd love to see that too, Paul. And I think anybody that pays GRT, which is everybody, is very grateful that your organization is continuing to pound the drum on that, right? Beat the drum on that's something that we need to be a more competitive state. I'm going to switch on you. We didn't talk about this one before we started, but I know that you've written about Chaco Canyon a little bit and Deb Haaland's federal designation with a 10-mile no drilling executive order, correct? Yep. And then she was supposed to go out there not too long ago, just a few days ago and kind of celebrate that. And she wasn't even able to leave Albuquerque as a result because of, I guess, the protests pro and against that were happening out there at the entrance of the canyon. Do you have any insight on that for us?
Well, when she locked up this land within a 10-mile radius of the Chaco Canyon monument, the monument's not a trivial size footprint itself. So, the bigger the area is, the bigger a 10-mile radius is. And the Navajo, who own a lot of mineral leasing rights in that area, that 10-mile buffer zone, had originally said the 5-mile buffer around Chaco Canyon was okay, but they didn't want it any bigger than that. And then ultimately, as negotiations kind of broke down with Haaland and the Biden administration, they went with a position of opposing outright any barrier the Navajo did. So, the Navajo are a big group of Native Americans in the state of New Mexico. There's a lot of poverty on the Navajo reservation and a lot of challenges that they face. And they see this administration cutting off their economic opportunity. So they protested. They came out and blockaded the road where Deb Haaland, Secretary Haaland, was coming into to make this big announcement and, bask in the accolades that she thought she was going to get. Well, the Navajo were having none of it. And, it just shows, I think, a lot of people, and I mean, Deb Haaland is Laguna Pueblo. Pueblos and Navajo aren't necessarily on the same page with a lot of different things going back in history.
Yeah, from the beginning, right? Historically, there were a lot. I think it's lost on some listeners, and I'll just say this, and just in case it's not, the idea that they were all friends before the Europeans arrived is kind of a joke. You know what I mean? They were very much rivals.
Right, and even reading books like The Blood and Thunder, which is a classic book about New Mexico history. I encourage folks to check that one out. But I don't think this is really a internecine battle between two Native American groups. I think this is much more that the Biden administration at large takes its cues from the kind of white liberal funding class of the Democratic Party. And if they have to step on a few toes out in the rural area of New Mexico with a group that traditionally the Navajo have been Democrat voting base, they've been for the Democratic Party. And, until there's that reaction, until something changes and threatens them politically, then they're going to continue to do these kinds of things because they see it as a no-loss strategy. They get to talk to the funding class of the Democratic Party back east about all the land that they're locking up and all the things that they're doing to stop oil and gas. And that's why you have our entire congressional delegation happy with this, sponsoring a 10-mile barrier. Right. They don't like oil and gas. They want to see it done away with. And this is just one more tool in their belts. But it was great to see the Navajos step up and speak out. And now at least the media can't completely ignore the cost of this particular policy, which is about $200 million in losses to the Navajo.
All right, and the community is supporting this. So I have two schools of thought on that. One is an executive order. So if you get another administration in, another executive order can very easily overturn it, right? So it's probably more easily overturned than something that was passed in the legislative process. So we have that.
That's true.
And so it could change it. It could change in one election, right? And then the other part is, and this is from a perspective that I don't really understand, being a European American whose family immigrated, of course, back like Ellis Island era, but you have a Native American telling Native Americans what they can and cannot do on their land. And the irony behind that, considering the history, to me, is just crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, and it's something that I think the media needs to do a better job of covering and highlighting that. People often, and this is true for a lot of different groups, they just see you're Native American. And when you come to New Mexico and you live, you understand that there's all these rich differences and groups that don't always get along and see eye to eye. And again, whether that's partially at root, I don't think Haaland is, quite frankly, making a lot of the big decisions at her department in Washington, D.C. I think maybe not even Joe Biden. I think the internal swamp there with regard to the Democratic Party is, kind of making a lot of these decisions, and Haaland's just going out to try to tout whatever she's got next up on the agenda. And so fascinating administration, the way it seems to be organized up there.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. And from this perspective, it certainly looks like President Biden is not really controlling or making any decisions. Just from this perspective, it just feels that way. I don't see how you can watch him and think that he's in complete control and has all his faculties. My grandmother's 87. And she is sharper than Joe Biden right now. I was like, seriously, I would trust. I mean, like, yes. So it's unbelievable. All right, we've got approximately 5 minutes left, Paul. So I want to give you a little less than 5 minutes. I want to give you the remaining time to kind of just talk about whatever you want to talk about in closing.
Yeah, well, one of the nice things that happened in the last legislative session that we've talked about is 529 plans, and this gets to our education component. Since y'all are based in Carlsbad, we talk a lot about oil and gas and that very important industry to New Mexico. But 529 plans are set up under the IRS code. That's where they get their name. And what they do is they give you a tax-advantaged way to save for education. Now, they were originally intended and designed for saving for college, but during the Trump administration, Congress and Trump got together and expanded 529 plans to allow them to be used to save for K-12 tuition, meaning potentially private school options, parochial school, whatever it is. Other options are available, apprenticeships and something called ABLE accounts for disabled people. But the big one was K-12 education. New Mexico hadn't complied with this law up until the last legislative session in 2023. But we have one of the best 529 plans in the entire country. You can save for your own child in one of these accounts. You can save for yourself in one of these accounts. You can save for your grandkids. You can save for the kid down the street. Whatever it may be, you can invest this money, including right in the stock market, generating a return with tax favors associated with it. And then if somebody doesn't use it, for example, you can roll it into a Roth IRA and use it for their retirement down the road. So it's probably the best single bill that passed in the legislative session, with the possible exception of the medical malpractice reform. And it was HB 342, passed without a single no vote. It was bipartisan. Ryan Lane from Farmington, the Republican minority leader, and the Senate Majority Leader, Peter Wirth. So it's definitely something you want to talk to your financial advisor about, talk to folks at the Education Plan. You can go to a website, The Education Plan, and find out more information about it there. I had a opinion piece circulating across the state of New Mexico that's also posted at Heirs of Enchantment and Rio Grande Foundation.org that folks can listen to or watch as well. I've got a podcast coming out here with the head of that organization, the Education Plan, which is a state funded organization. They're very small, they're very lean, but they're to administer these 529 plans. So it's a great way to save and get a tax advantage and possibly use it for K-12 in addition to college, depending on your own family's needs.
Okay, I mean, that sounds amazing. I was not aware of that at all. So the 529 plans, you want to go to the Education Plan. Is that .com or .gov or .org?
It's the educationplan.com.
.com, right. So, okay. All right, so go to the educationplan.com. You're going to interview the gentleman that's going to explain this. We air your podcast every Wednesday at noon on our station. So anybody that's listening, they can tune in on an upcoming Wednesday at noon, and we will also air the podcast that Paul is referencing that they're about to release. So you'll hear that here or on his website, tippingpointnm.com. And Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation. Anything else you want to say, Paul?
No, just make sure to check out our websites and that podcast. I really think that's a great way to listen, and those broadcasts are a great way to find out what's going on in New Mexico. I say anybody that listens to our show on a regular basis is among the 0.01% most well-informed New Mexicans.
Well, put me on that list, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny.
All right, man. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.